I don't think there could have been a better place for me to grow up than where I did. I loved growing up in the country, and I would never want to live anywhere else now. Actually, when I go on vacation or a trip, I honestly am excited to come home. I wonder if other people feel the same way about where they live. Okay, admit, I could have stayed a little bit longer in Ireland, or I could have fished for silver salmon a little bit longer in Cold Bay, Alaska. Growing up in a small town was great for me as a kid. I walked to school and kindergarten from one end of Pinehurst to the other. I can't imagine doing that now or letting your kids do that. I spent tons of time fishing up Pine Creek with renegades or Royal Coachmans on my fly pole. I didn't really understand, but I was kind of a loner when I was young, so I spent a lot of time by myself. As I got older, I realized my dad was a lot the same. Dad was a log sawyer, and he oftentimes would spend all week in the woods in his camper, and he'd only come home on the weekends. Mom raised us. She was a stay-at-home mom, me and my two brothers, Lenny, my older brother, and Todd, my younger brother. The day my little brother was born, we were actually picking huckleberries that day, and when we got home, we found out that Todd was born, and Grandma Maud made us a huckleberry pie. It was a special day. You know, I actually had a really good childhood, and as I got older, I realized when I got around other people, I was kind of in the minority of having a functional upbringing. We lived in Pinehurst until I was 12, and then we started the 7th grade out at Kootenai High School out along Highway 3 towards Harrison. Mom and Dad had bought a piece of land out there, and I wasn't super excited about going, but it was such a crossroad in my life, and I am so thankful that we made the move. I was born in 1964 in Wallace, Idaho. I grew up in the Silver Valley up in Pinehurst, Smelterville area. I remember we lived at 705 A Street in Pinehurst, right on the south end of town, and I grew up there until I was 12 years old. I was 4.5 when I started kindergarten, so I must have been, with the age difference, I must have been a little bit ahead with my birthday. And so I started kindergarten when I wasn't quite 5 yet. I remember we walked the whole length of town from one end of town to the next, and we just didn't even think of it. Me and a couple of my friends got together so I would walk to school starting at 4.5 years old. I'm just like, man, now your kid's 15. You're like, man, I don't know if I trust him to go down the grocery store. But it was a whole different ball game back then. I guess I never really had the urge to go away or go do anything anywhere else, because it seemed like every trip I've been on or different country or vacation that I've ever been on, it's like I can't wait to get home. My dad was a logger, and so he was a log sawyer, so he spent a lot of time in the woods, and that was tough for us because I remember my dad, and I never held any regrets against my dad, but he just wasn't home a lot when I was growing up. And I remember he stayed out in the woods, so he had a camper. He would leave Monday morning. He'd be in camp all week. He'd come home Friday afternoon. We get to see him. And of course, I know now, all the errands. He mowed the lawn. He did what he needed to do. And then he spent Sunday getting ready to go. We weren't really churchgoers back then. I remember we went to, I think, a Lutheran church. I went with my friends quite a bit to the Assemblies of God church. I don't know if it was because it was close to my house or if it was close and I would just take my fish and put my fly rod with me and I would stash it outside the church. And then when I got out of church, I would go fly fishing. I spent as much time as I could with my dad. And then of course, when I was 12, probably 11, 12, we started to elk hunt a little bit. Of course, I never shot an elk till I was 17. And of course, I was with my dad, the first elk I ever shot. So my dad and I spent a lot of time doing that together, a lot of bass fishing and stuff. My mom and dad bought property out along Highway 3 by the end of Cave Lake, and we moved out there, and I started the 7th grade. My dad was building a house, and they wanted us to start school for that school year, even though the house wasn't finished. So my mom would drive us to Rose Lake, and me and my older brother, Lenny, he's 2 years older than me. we would go to Kootenai High School, and then my little brother Todd was 4 years younger than I was, so he went right to the elementary school at Rose Lake. We lived right by Cave Lake, so we had really good fishing there, crappie and bass and perch. And then I would walk down to Black Lake through the fields. It was about probably a mile away, but we used to walk down there. We'd spend the day down at the lake swimming and fishing. I think growing up out in the country it affects people different. I mean, there's some people can't wait to get to town. I was the exact opposite. I loved it out in the country. I remember I spent so much time walking the swamp and walking the railroad tracks, grab a shotgun and go down and shoot a few ducks. I mean, I used to walk 10 miles to shoot a couple of blue-winged teal and think I was really something. That was a pretty successful hunt. And now I'm spoiled. I have a really nice long shaft mud motor boat. I have an Argo with tracks, and I can throw all my decoys and just drive it from my house. And back in the day, we would take the boat, pack it down to the river, row across the river, drag the boat and the motor, all the decoys. We'd drag it about probably 200 yards, 250 yards across the land to Swan Lake. Then we would go take the boat across, and sometimes we would go duck hunting in the morning and deer hunting in the afternoon. And if we killed a deer, or if we were elk hunting over there, we'd have to pack all that meat back, pack it all across the land because the water was down so low you couldn't get the boat in and out of the lake. And we'd have to drag it across the land. I mean, I cannot believe the amount of work that we did for a dumb deer or a couple of ducks, but hey, we loved it. That was what we lived for. And even in college, I would come home every weekend during hunting season, and I just couldn't wait to get out of school. I didn't like school, and I just liked it at home. And so I never really ever felt an urge to leave. I think moving out to the country was it was a good move for me. I didn't realize this until later. I'm fairly introverted, and so I'm social enough to where I can talk to people. Obviously, I sell real estate, so you have to talk to somebody or you'd never sell anything. But I was pretty introverted, so I did a lot of stuff by myself, and I started hunting and fishing by myself. So when it came time to sports, I've always been big. I was probably 250 pounds when I was in high school, and of course everybody was always on me to play football, but I just didn't enjoy sports like I enjoyed hunting and fishing. I remember as a freshman, my friends recruited me to play football for Kootenai, and I was probably at that time, I was probably 6'2", probably 200 pounds, 220. I don't know if anybody else remembers Bull in the Ring. You point at somebody and you got to go hit them. You had to keep getting hit and getting hit and getting hit. And I absolutely hated it. Even though I was big physically, I wasn't big mentally yet. I wasn't used to it. And so I got the absolute tar beat out of myself by the seniors. And I remember that because of that, and it wasn't wisdom on the coaches' part to let those, the kids beat me up. But I did not play for my sophomore and junior year. And I think back of that sometimes because I kind of regretted it later that I didn't play my other, sophomore, junior year. So I came back in my senior year and played football. And of course, I was probably 260, 6'4", 6'5". And so even though I was a bit fluffy, I was big enough to where I didn't get pushed around or anything. And so I actually enjoyed my last year of football. I always was friends with the popular kids, but I've never been one of the popular kids, if that makes sense. So I had a lot of friends that, socially they were popular and stuff, and they were my friends and stuff, but I just I never really felt like I was much in a group. Like say I grew up, I was heavy my whole life. I mean, in 7th grade, I still remember I went out for wrestling. I was 175 pounds and I was just totally out of shape. And so I got teased a lot in school for being fat. I think it's so funny is that on my 20-year class reunion, I went back, and of course my wife Sherry was with me, and I got voted most changed at my 20-year class reunion. You want to know the only difference? I had a hot wife with me. I was exactly the same way. I'm exactly the same today. If you looked at pictures back then, I'd probably have camouflage pants on and a flannel shirt. I haven't changed. I've always been the same. I just had a really good looking wife with me. I remember people talk about, going to the prom and stuff like that. I asked 3 different girls to the prom, and it's not like we had a huge choice at Kootenai High School. I think there was like 21 people in our graduating class, and I think there was 3 girls. So we didn't have like this huge selection, but yeah, I got shot down 3 times to go to the prom. So I think my wife's been to several proms. I've been to 0. All that stuff made me who I am. My dad instilled in me a hard work ethic. I've worked hard my whole life, and what I lacked in other things, I made up for with hard work. I wouldn't say that I'm rebellious. I'm a smidge stubborn. I will help anybody in the world, but I really don't like being told what to do. The only one that can really get away with that in my life now is my wife. But of course, she would never tell me what to do. She always asked nicely, like every awesome wife should. When I was a senior, I went out for a whole year of track. So I went to every single track practice. I ran and did all the exercises with the track team, but I did not sign up because I didn't want anybody to tell me what to do. So I went to every single practice, worked out every day with the track team, and I went to no track meets. I was raised that you believed in God. I always believed there was a God. I didn't have a personal relationship with the Lord, but I was raised in, we went and did our ceremonial couple times a year at church, Christmas or Easter and that kind of thing. But I always had a respect that there was God, and that always seemed to it played a role in my life. Not that I always made wise decisions or that I was the perfect person, but I've always been conscientious of other people. I've always had a heart to help other people. And I know now what that was is God calling me to the office of a pastor. I didn't understand what it was back then, but I fought it. I got caught up in the worldly stuff and the sports and the running around and everything else and the drinking. But I know that the Lord was always pulling on me because I always wanted to do things right. I always wanted to set a good standard. I never want to hurt my friends' feelings. I never wanted to disappoint my parents. I don't know. I guess if I went back, I probably wouldn't change anything even about my physical self, because I think growing up as a fat kid and having to deal with all that, I think that made me who I am. And I don't know if I'd be the same person if I didn't go that way. My dad taught me how to work on motors. First pickup I ever bought, I was 16. I think I paid 150 or $200 for it. Had a blown motor. I was the parts cleaner, so everything was Chevy orange and chrome. And my dad rebuilt that motor. He put a 350 horsepower 327 cam in it, and we put a Holley 650 double pumper on it. And we pulled out of the Black Lake Road right below the house, and my dad laid a burn off for about 50 or 60 feet clear to the mailbox on the test drive of the motor, and said, "Yeah, I think it'll be okay." I still remember that. My dad had a huge grin on his face, but my dad was very mechanical that way, so we spent a lot of time working on things like that, and no, good times. The property that we lived on, that we grew up in, my dad built a big A-frame. I helped him build it. Me and my brothers helped. At that time, we weren't living out on the property yet. My dad had bought, I think it was like 16 acres or something like that at the time, and bought it right by the end of the Cave Lake. Did a little bit of dirt work, and then we started working on the house. And I remember helping my dad. My Uncle Charlie had on his hammer hand, he had these 2 fingers, this one cut off, and with these 2 fingers on his hand, he could out hammer anybody around. He was a great carpenter. We did a lot of work on the house. So, packing 2x10s for floor joists. I still remember, there was my dad's upstairs wall. The front wall of our house was just under 30 feet high. And then all the beams and everything. I remember my dad and my Uncle Charlie hoisting those up with pulleys and ropes. And But that's the way we did it, So our house was unfinished when we started going to school, but on the weekends and stuff, when my dad could, when he wasn't working, we would work on the house. So we packed all the bricks for all the chimney. My dad did all the mortar for the chimney on that. He split all the cedar shakes. He had been collecting cedar bolts, the chunks of cedar for the shakes. He collected those for years. And my dad split and roofed that whole house. And he hated heights. And so I remember him being scared to death when we were roofing the house and building the chimney and everything. But that's just the way it was. It was back then. We didn't have the money to hire it out. Here you got my old man. If you watch the other video, here's my dad that dug a whole basement in his house in Pinehurst by hand with a shovel and then poured the walls and the floor and everything else. Here he was doing a lot of the work on his own house. And we finally got settled in. And, what's funny is my mom did not like it at first, but then as the years went by, you couldn't pull her off the hill. She just loved it out there. And, one of the biggest things that I can remember is we did a lot of bird hunting. And so we would set out and absolutely freeze to death out in the blind all day. And we didn't have good clothes and heaters and everything like we have now. So it was all I could do to stay warm. And then sometimes when a flock of geese came in, we were so cold we couldn't hit anything anyways. But I remember one of the best memories I have of growing up out there was coming home, and my mom would bake fresh bread on the weekends. And so she would always make cinnamon rolls and fresh bread. And I remember looking forward to that while we were out freezing to death so we could get home and have fresh bread and cinnamon rolls. I love that. I miss that part of growing up. It was awesome.
Got a bunch of wings. These are me and Jeff's right here. These are Dad and Johnny's. Young guys, old guys.
How many did the old guys get?
3, and this one, the head shooter didn't shoot it in the head.
Yeah. The pig hunter was hogging all of those.
So you can pretty much see from this that the geese are a lot safer when they go by Dad and Johnny. Or just maybe not as many went by them.
You can see by this that ours look a lot bigger, and that there wasn't near many flew away from our blind as flew away from the blind next to it.
Even when I was in high school, I always thought that I wanted to work for the Fish and Game. They used to have that, it was some kind of a program where you could go to work. A couple of years I worked at the high school, and then a couple of years I worked for the Fish and Game. And I really enjoyed working for the Fish and Game, running around in airboats and planting, harvesting wild rice and building goose platforms and checking wood duck boxes. And I really enjoyed that. So I thought that I wanted to become a game warden. So that was my plan for the future, was that I was going to go to school, spent 2 years at NIC in a law enforcement program. I got an associate's degree in law enforcement because I thought that that's what I needed to be a game warden. And I look back on it now, and when I went to talk to counselors, the counselors at school didn't really give me great advice because you really don't need a law enforcement degree to become a game warden. So I spent 2 years in school, lived at home, drove back and forth from NIC, and I got my associate's degree. I think I graduated there in '84. And then the next year I went down to the University of Idaho and worked on it was called Wildlife Resources degree. So it was a 4-year, it was a bachelor's degree in wildlife resources, which was a lot of zoology, ornithology, biology, anatomy and physiology, chemistry. I hated school. I spent a lot of time hunting pheasants and fishing for steelhead, even though I was a terrible steelhead fisherman. I was the guy that would run it up to 80 or 100 hours per fish because that was the week that I went. I was terrible at it, but I just didn't like school, so I spent a lot of time hunting and fishing down there. One thing that I really did enjoy while I was at school, though, I spent 3 years playing rugby for U of I, and I really enjoyed that, and it helped me get in shape. One summer, I lost 50 pounds, and I went back to school. I was probably about I was probably about 270 pounds, and I was in pretty good shape. And I remember going to the first rugby practice, and I had been running all summer. And when we ran that day, we used to have to run laps in the Kibbe Dome and sets of stairs where you go up one set of stairs, go over and go back down, and you do that, and then you'd run around the concourse to the top. That was one loop, and we would do 3 or 4 of those a day at rugby practice. And I remember the first day, I was the second guy, and I just thought, oh my God, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to finally be in shape, and I could really hold my own on the rugby team. Until about the second week, and then everybody else got in shape, and then I was last again anyways. But for that one practice, I was in the first 2, so I was pretty pumped for that. It was weird for me because I liked the team aspect of stuff. We would go watch the U of I football players play, and they would have a fist fight in the middle of their practice, right in the middle of the field, and I just thought, wow, that's really great team camaraderie, and the rugby team was different. Yes, they drank a lot of beer, but everybody got along, and it was fun. We had a good time, and everybody played hard and got along great on the team. And I actually, a couple of years after I graduated, I went over and played at the Maggot Fest. If you hadn't heard of the Maggot Fest, it's a big rugby tournament over in Missoula, Montana. I went over and played a couple of years with that. And actually, I played for an Eastern team out of Washington, D.C. called Potomac, and we won the tournament that year. I played all my games with them because I couldn't find any room on any other team there. I look at the athletes today and, gosh, my youngest is going to University of Idaho. And every time the kids down there make a great play on the football team, he plays on the marching band and stuff down there. It's like, oh my God, they make a play and then they do a dance and then go get a 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. I got so turned off from athletics when I was in college because I bounced at a bar on the weekends, and I used to fight with football players and basketball players from Wazoo and U of I every weekend. And I hated it. In fact, I hated it so bad that when I got out of college, I don't think I watched a football game probably for 25 years. And I didn't watch any college basketball or anything until probably maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I started watching Gonzaga women play. And now, of course, we like watching the Gonzaga men's play, and it's a big deal. My dad loves it too. So we get tickets when we can and take him to the game. And he digs that stuff. Ended up getting out of school, and I went to work for the fishing game. And part of the jobs that I did, it was an awesome job. For 2 years, I fished for white sturgeon on the Kootenai River. So I fished from the Kootenai River, or Lake Kootenai over in Canada. I fished that whole river from the lake all the way as far as you could go up into Montana. I fished that 4 times over 2 years, the whole stretch. And we fished it with, rod and reel, and we fished it with set lines, and I processed sturgeon. So we caught hundreds of sturgeon. And then in the winter, when we weren't fishing, a lot of times I'd go down to University of Idaho and do studies, and pull up study information and stuff for the biologist that I was working for, Kim, that was working on that project. It was a fantastic job, and I made $6 an hour. It wasn't something obviously you're going to make a living at, but I got by, and I picked up some other part-time jobs. I bounced in a bar and when I wasn't working for the Fish and Game. For several years after college, I put in to interview for a conservation officer job with Fish and Game. And finally, I think it was, I had an associate's degree, 2 years, 4 years of a bachelor's degree, 6 years, and 4 years part-time that I worked for the Fish and Game. And I finally got a job as a conservation technician down in southern Idaho, I was stationed out of Payette. And I was so excited to finally get into something that I had really wanted to do. It was my first introduction to the political arena. In northern Idaho, I wasn't used to that. I used to be able to get a job. I would call somebody and go, hey, I'm a Jenicek, and they would be all right, be here Monday and you can go to work. That's how it was with my family. And so I never had a hard time finding a job. Getting into the fishing game was different, and I was stationed down by Boise. I ended up getting into a huge fight with my boss, and it was interesting because one day he called me into his office and said, I still vividly remember this. He goes, Jamie, he goes, I don't like you. I don't want to spend time with you, but I have to because you work for me. And then we went on and he ended up telling me what I didn't do right. There were some things that I needed to grow in, but a lot of it was ego on his part. The very next week, he called me into his boss's office to sit down. And keep in mind, he just told me how much he didn't like me. He opened up the appointment with, Jamie, this is hard for me because I really like you. And basically, I was put into a position where I either had to get fired or resign. That was hard for me. Here I am in my mid-20s, worked hard my whole life. I spent 10 years working towards this job. And then I ran into somebody who pulled the ladder out from underneath me. And I was pretty hurt. I was mad. And I ended up resigning from the fishing game and coming back home. And I had actually called every game warden that I worked with to talk to them to see if anybody would step up and try to help me get straightened out. And actually, the guy that I was working for at the time, about 6 months after I left, he got demoted and he got moved up to northern Idaho, of all the places. So he wasn't doing his job. I was the scapegoat. I lost my job over it, and then they moved him up here to North Idaho. Back then, and in my 20s, I just did not realize that the Lord had a way better idea than the plan I had put together. I think about that scripture, man will have his plans and God will have his way. And I think a lot of times we go through these challenges and we wonder, oh, Lord, why would you do this? Or why would you allow this to happen? But you know what? We can't see outside the box of what we're in. And I'm so thankful because if I would have never lost that job, again, only job I've ever lost in my life. I'm not saying I haven't quit some jobs, but that's the only job I've ever been let go from. And had I not done that, had I not gone through that, I would have never met my wife. I may not be born again. I wouldn't have my kids. And so that was a great learning experience for me, going, sometimes things happen in our lives. We don't understand why. We probably ought to take more time and think about it and go, okay, Lord, what do you have? What's the bigger plan? Am I missing something? Is there something I don't see? But like me, I was very fleshy. And again, like I say, for a couple of years, that was really hard for me. I really had to work through that. My uncle from the valley and my cousin, they owned Panhandle Pipe and Welding out of Smelterville. And then in the summer times, I would weld gas pipe and install gas lines. And I did that in the summer for money in between school. I didn't mind construction. But I liked working with people more. And I mean, I'm so glad that my cousin and my uncle taught me how to weld. And I welded gas mains and ran equipment. And so I'm so thankful for that, because that was a skill set that I think more people should have. So one of the things you might hear if you're in the Silver Valley, especially in October, is you might hear, hey, did you get your elk yet? I think that's one of the things that my identity became, because I was so self-conscious. I was insecure with myself. I spent so much time alone hunting and fishing that hunting became my badge that I would wear. I was known as shooting ducks and geese. And so I wore that hunting as a badge. And I did not really like elk hunting, and this was an eye-opener for me, because I had killed an elk one night, and when I went back in and checked the elk in the next day when I packed it out, the gal had asked me, she said, how many days did you hunt? And I had counted them like 33 days. And I'm like, that was kind of an eye-opener. I'll never forget when I figured that out, because I didn't realize. I think as humans, we sort of justify things. We hide things. If somebody were to ask us how hard we worked, and man, we're giving 110%, but do we really? Maybe 45, maybe 60. But I was an absolute hunting addict. And so I hadn't killed an elk with my bow, hadn't killed an elk with a rifle. And so I borrowed a muzzleloader from the Donahos, and I went up Evans Creek elk hunting, and I jumped this little bull, this little 5-point bull. I jumped him probably 4 or 5 times. I chased him all over the place, and I finally got a shot at him. He was about 60 yards broadside, and he was standing behind a windfall with the limbs coming down. And I shot right through the brush and right through the limbs, and I went up there, and I'm colorblind, so I can't see blood anyway, but I couldn't find any hair or blood or anything in the snow. And I remember I started bawling. Here I am. I'm, I don't know, must have been, oh gosh, I was 25, 26 years old. And then I walked up, I followed his tracks up the hill, and there he was laying there. Never have really liked muzzleloaders. But of course, then I was super happy. So I ended up gutting him out, and I went home that night. Of course, I'm pretty pumped up that I killed another elk, and I called my friend Scott Donahoe, and we had heard about a party in Kellogg that was up by Dirty Ernie's, and little did I know my life was going to change that night.